First things first, this video is not legal advice. Nothing in this video should be construed as legal advice. This is all for educational and entertainment purposes only. Okay, I am thankfully not a bar attorney. This is not an offer to be your attorney. Keep that in mind as we produce and continue with this video. Everybody, welcome, and we are going to be speaking on sealing court records, performing pro se legal research on our own, and essentially a high-level overview of how to represent or present ourselves in court. I'm here with the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Christopher Bauer, the guy that showed me how to do this. And so, Chris, take it away. Let's hear what's going on today.
I'm here today to help North Dakota and other states kind of understand how we can seal records that have, I would say, damaged you personally. Especially with dismissals, acquittals that people can publicly access and use it against you. I mean, the overall impact is, you'll never get that job because somebody decided to look it up and not understand what the decision or deposition of the case is.
So you mean like if I'm trying to find a job that somebody can actually look this up and see that court case is there, even though I know it was dismissed and illegally brought in the first place, that employer can actually still see it and leverage it in their decision making?
Yes, most ultimately, yes. I cannot even say that these are just unfair ways to judge a person without even understanding what actually happened in your lifetime. I mean, I was a victim of stuff from 20 years ago that are still being brought up 20 years later, even losing a job from people submitting the information to my employer. I mean, it's a huge problem, and I think sealing the records from the public is very important because they don't understand it.
That makes sense to me. Okay, and so you mentioned we're talking mostly about dismissals and acquittals. Let's say
Yes.
I got a felony or a conviction, or I'm looking at expungement. Is that something that is on the table here for us today to talk about?
We can explore it, but we can basically say each state has its own legislation and laws that are regarding certain criterias like DUIs, felonies, even right restoration after felonies. I mean, like here in Alaska, if you lose your rights as a gun owner, they can eventually give you your rights back, even if you were convicted of a felon. There's always certain criterias that the state legislation can do. But focusing on North Dakota, I mean, we deal with dismissals, acquittals, especially in my situation, and I believe in your situation too, is that we can get these things sealed that have no merit to who we are as a person.
Awesome. Right. Okay. So we're going to focus on everybody, just to clarify, the dismissals and acquittals today, and we will expand in another video on other situations as we become
Yep.
more fluent in the pro se process, which we're going to cover today too.
Yes.
Awesome. So what's up? What's on deck, Chris?
Well, North Dakota is legendary for their North Dakota database. That's what's so interesting is that the law and legislation of legislators actually gave us a chance to seal records. They followed under Chapter 1260 that says that we have grounds to file petition to seal criminal records. Unfortunately, this means that this is out of the sight of the public, but fortunately, it benefits you. The other thing is that judges, lawyers, magistrates, police officers still have access to that system as long as they're employees of the government. Otherwise, these are typically not used in a court of law. Like, for instance, the case that I was the butt bandit inside Hardee's parking lot. They actually did not use any of my previous cases because they were sealed up or they're not admissible in court. But
Awesome.
North Dakota Century Code 1260. This is our rules and regulations that allow for our voters to actually seal their own personal records.
Awesome. So this is like the Century Code. That is like North Dakota's rules. Is that kind of the fair way to put that?
Yes, these are the people you vote for that makes legislative law to protect the people of the state itself. And like I said, each state has their own legislation that governs the rules of sealing criminal records.
I gotcha. So when their legislators make laws here in North Dakota, they become something that they embed into the Century Code.
Yes,
Got it.
most
Okay.
definitely.
Cool. And
Yep.
so when we go into chapter 12-60, we can find exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, and I'll zoom in on this. So 1260-1 is your overall guidance on sealing criminal records. They have multiple sections in with this. 15 pages kind of guides this around is the overall sealing of your records, the legal research guide for sealing records, your basic court process, and your attorney resources.
Okay,
And
just a
what's
second,
interesting,
Chris. I wanted to
yeah,
just touch on like just so that I'm clear, because people sometimes don't know what century code is. This is the equivalent of like Nevada revised statutes, or
yes,
these kinds of things. That language. That's what we're talking about. That's where you're gonna find how to seal your record in your state is finding the equivalent language. Here in North Dakota, they call it the century code. Other places they call it the revised statutes, etc. Okay, thank you, Chris.
yes. Yeah, and we call it Alaska statutes here in Alaska. They kept it simple instead of the North Dakota Century Code.
Sure.
Um, but code and laws and legislation, it gives us an opportunity to protect ourselves. And I think this is a benefit for all the people who have records that are dismissed, one, and two, are acquitted of crimes.
And because they're
And that's,
dismissed or acquitted, sorry to jump in, but because they're
yeah,
dismissed or acquitted, that's them saying, hey, this isn't a threat to the public and therefore isn't of interest to the public, right?
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And that's where I was always saying that employers and people who look on the public records use this against you for to guide in if you get hired or not. And that's the detriment outcome of having public records is that people don't understand that these things are dismissals and acquittals, and they would be like, "Oh, you're a criminal." Well, and you're not. You're technically not. You're dismissed and acquitted from a crime. And I'm a good example in my case.
I think your case is fantastic. I'd love to have as much or info that you care to share with us because that was
Sure.
insane. And I was sitting there, I was in the gallery watching it happen, and it was an insane situation.
I
So
don't wish that seat on anyone who's not guilty. Even though most of the situations are you prove yourself innocent until you're guilty or so, vice versa. However,
right.
but kind of diving into this is that you really don't need assistance at all. You don't need an attorney. You don't need anything. You really just have to do a lot of reading on how this process works. And I
The
think that's
sealing
what's so
court process. That's what you mean, right?
yeah, the sealing court process,
Okay.
even in certain filings as pro se litigation. But ultimately, you don't need an attorney. A good example, if you were to use an attorney, which I've actually asked my attorney Chapman about, is
Okay.
hey, if I get acquitted in this criminal case, can you file expungement or sealing of the records? He says, well, I have to do my research. It's been a while. So, and that's kind of another process. You're paying an attorney to do a free process on top of it when you just spend some time and read it and do it yourself.
So you're saying I don't need nobody needs an attorney to do this,
No.
and we're able to engage on our own. So there you go, everybody. So Chris,
Yep.
tell us more about what is this document? Is this what happens when you click on 12-60.1?
Yes. So when you're jumping over, I'll switch over screens here real quick. Is grounds the petition to seal criminal records? We're looking at. I'll screw back up. 60.1. Anytime you come to this site, which is the ndlegis.gov,
Mm-hmm.
you click on your links of definitions if you need to know definitions. But the guidance right here is, I'm going to click 6002. And it brings up this legislative law. This is the actual document that says this is the code that applies. So when you
Cool.
start doing your court records and stuff, they start developing another form. And that's why it's so confusing because this document you're looking at right now is the actual guidance that they would use in a court. Now, this document is built by the Legal Self-Help Center. They have to follow the guidance of this document, but ultimately they can be out of date. So always follow through and check out what's the right form. But right now, currently, this is the current form of information that's built off of this century code right here.
You said that okay, just so that everybody is aware, this will be up to date. The
Yes.
next one sometimes is out of date, so that's the reason why we want to be up to date with what is currently happening in our revised statutes, or our century code.
Yes, exactly. Because, they could change the form, they can change a version, and they can reject your filing and saying, hey, this form is expired. Let's see, kind of give you an idea. The last time they updated that form was, May 2024.
Awesome.
That's gives you an idea that it's more current. I would probably not see another revision for another year or two.
That makes sense to me. Got it.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chris.
Hey, no problem. Yeah, and then when we start about talking about rules and access to court records, they use an administrative rule 41 that guidance how to seal the record from public view. And I think that's important, that there's an administrative rule. And these rules are actually telling the people how to do their job inside the legislation as well as the judicial branch. Even your court clerks, they need to follow these rules of the court. That's also a guidance from your statutes of, North Dakota Century Code 440418. A lot of it's built on the Century Code itself.
And this administrative rule came from the Supreme Court. I think you said that, right?
Yeah, so it either comes from the Supreme Court or it comes from legislative North Dakota Constitution, where you see right here. I think that's the most benefit, is that a Constitution of the North Dakota governs this as well. It comes from the authority of the North Dakota Constitution, Article 9, Paragraph 6.
There you
You
go.
can't go any higher than that.
That
Yeah, you can't even go higher.
That's what we call a primary source, right?
Yes. And what's interesting in North Dakota is that you have the right to enjoy your employment, and that's even written in the Constitution. So you even have a higher level of authority to enjoy your employment.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank
Yep.
you so much, Chris. That's very good
Yep.
information right there. You get a drink of water here as you pull up the next thing.
Yep. So ultimately, I know when we start kind of using an example of a court record, how do we find it? We're going to find a court record, and we're going to use mine today because it hasn't been sealed, but it has grounds to be sealed.
And this is
Google,
anybody, right? Anybody in the world.
anybody that has focused on North Dakota, anybody who has a dismissal or acquittal in North Dakota can do this currently today.
Well, I mean, anybody can research anybody's record.
Yes. Oh, most definitely. I mean, I'll just give you an idea. I don't even know a person, but you do a Google search North Dakota courts.
Yep.
I'm going to go ahead and choose the state of North Dakota, and we're just going to choose some random name. Hopefully, there might not be a name out there. I'm going to choose the Criminal Traffic Division.
Yep.
And let's just go. What the heck? Better yet,
Type in Johnson.
Actually, let's just do this one.
Okay.
I think this is good. This is a good one.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, let's see.
This is an interesting one because it's got some history with this name, and we'll kind of see what's out there, right? So let's pull it up.
All right.
I know it's underlying humor, but people look at this. What's interesting? Thomas Simon. We already know who he's affiliated with, but that's okay. Is that you have to identify a person in a record, and they use key things like date of births. You can kind of see what the North Dakota pulls up: date of births and everything, locations and infractions.
Got it.
Even the court date and case numbers, right?
Yep.
And there's quite an extensive history. Like if I was going to focus on the editorial Thomas Simon, he was born in 59, and you got to make sure that you centralize your focus search. And I'm bringing this up because people can use these things against you and go, well, I pulled up Christopher Bauer, who's a pedophile. Sorry, unfortunately, that was not me because his date of birth was different. And this is a real world example. When I was doing a baseball coach, they did a background check and said, hey, you're on the sex offender list. I said, I am. Well, that guy's in Georgia. I'm in Alaska. You got the date of births wrong. And that's what's so important, is that when you're doing your research, you're choosing the right record and the right information on what you're pulling up.
Wow.
And this is how this is how employers really screw up their research. Well, I saw your name. Well, is it really me? Because Thomas Jesse Simon, who has all these infractions, was born in 92. But imagine if they were doing a background check on Thomas Simon, the Facebooker, and they assume that all this stuff above him is him, and it's not. So that's why it's so critical you do your research properly.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Is there a way in North Dakota, I know you showed me one time in Alaska, that certain things will actually pop up, and we have to do a little bit more research because there's a disclaimer in Alaska's record search. Is that something to talk about right now, or is that?
Just to kind of go into that here real quick, let's do that, because Alaska has been sued and individuals have been sued because they failed to identify the clauses of dismissals and acquittals. And I don't mind. My history is out there, and I'm going to go Alaska court view, right? This is the best way to get Alaska.
Okay.
Right? We pull it up. I'm search here. And the first thing that they should be disclaiming is make sure, hey, when you search a court record, the website is not a criminal history records check of a person. You as an individual, and I'm going to let's use a real world example. Thomas Simon did this to me, right, a year ago.
Okay.
He pulls it up and publishes all the things I'm about to show you, right? But this is such an important factor that you read these notices. this is actually stopping the government for being sued, but at the same time, it's warning you as a person that if you publish information wrong, you can be sued.
I
And these are
see.
why these North Dakota does not do that. And we kind of use the layman term. When I come back to this, where's the disclosure?
Yeah,
Where's
there's
the there is none.
nothing.
So Alaska's modeled a better approach and says we better put the notices out there.
And so
Of
this
course,
notice protects both the state and puts any independent researcher on notice as well that they are bearing now the
yes,
liability.
yes. And for instance, we'll dive into my thing. I'm not opposed to it because I think it's a real world example. I'm
Okay.
gonna go ahead and pull up search criminal records. Here's the cool thing: they even do a notice again. Here's all the notices again. So they're double notifying the public. North Dakota, and I know we'll dive into mine right now, is that's not even a disclosure. Let's pull up my court record number, right? The
Okay.
one that can be sealed here in the future.
Okay.
Where's the disclosures? It immediately comes to the court case.
Yeah,
Alaska is immediately showing more disclosures and warnings.
I see.
It's interesting because you got to be very careful when you use this information. So search the case. I'm going to pull up my name by general, and this is what Thomas Simon did. And this is a good example for false news reporting. And I hit my name, I hit search, and you have to wait, of course. Look,
Mhm.
okay, well, you can
Wow.
see all this stuff, but when you dig into a case, you need to look at the disposition of a case. It shows
Okay.
they're all closed, right? But unfortunately, you need to dive into it. And I want to kind of find one that was dismissed. Like, see, basically, I'll tell you, he said I was a domestic offender. Well, I am. Well, there's no crime of a domestic violence here. I passed background checks here most recently here too. But for you to look at what's the right disposition, you have to dive deeper into the file. So let's click it.
Hmm.
Here's the case file, right? Here's the disposition. Okay, yeah, they had a long term ordered and granted, but it was denied a motion. This is why you got to look at these most certain things important to doing this. You can't just, oh, let me go backwards here real quick.
So
Go to
you're
the results.
to be crude, to be like layman's,
Go ahead.
we cannot be judging books by their covers on this. We need to go into the
Yes.
details and find what's called the disposition. What's a layman's term for disposition? What would you call it? Like, is that like the
Oh,
detail?
guilty or not guilty.
I
Yeah, you were
see.
guilty or not guilty, like you're convicted or not convicted. Because what they do is they take a screenshot of this and they publish out there in the public and go, hey, guess what? You're a criminal. Well, you didn't really look into the details. And this is because legislation in Alaska says we need to make this all public. And we can fight this with sealing of the records process, which is great. Or you can actually talk to your legislators and get this change and say, well, if a case is dismissed or acquitted, it should not be publicly accessible. Guess what? North Dakota's working on that as well. Currently, this year in legislation, is if you were dismissed or acquitted, the record's automatically sealed. I hope they
Awesome.
get it passed. I hope they
Awesome.
pass it because it's so important that this stuff doesn't get misconstrued. But this is a good example.
Thank you, Chris. This is incredible. Everybody, I hope you're seeing the value here. And this is why, this is how damaging it can be because in the day and age of Facebook and publishing, how fast information can spread and how fast independent journalism, because, the first person to report is the most popular and blah blah blah, right? And so we
Yeah.
have this problem of we don't if we're not going to do our independent research but yet be independent journalists, well then we're putting people's lives at risk of detriment. And so this is why sealing these records is important.
Yeah, and another topic is like if this stuff becomes so detrimentally impact and these people actually cause damage, you can sue them. And currently, without going into a further subject, I am actively pursuing that because people have used that kind of information to damage an individual, which has prevented you from, I would say, life and liberty. And that's the most important values that you should be able to live in this country with life and liberty. And people try to take that away from you. And this is a good example how.
Yep. Minus due
So
process or without due process, we are not to be deprived of life and liberty, and that is a problem. So,
that is a problem, and it's very important to live in a country that still has that. Kind of jumping back is like, let's go back to this case that just got acquitted here in February, right? Well,
mhm.
I don't want this viewed. So, I got to make sure that the standards apply with the law that according to sealing of the records. And
Yeah.
let's just dig into this case.
Okay.
We obviously know here's the plea. I pled not guilty, and that's important. So if you want to have appeal rights and you want to be able to seal records in the future, don't plead guilty. Sometimes pleading guilty is not the right answer. Even though you were guilty, it's always good to kind of set your foundation of due process, right? Always plead not guilty, and you could have a lesser crime. Murder and all this other stuff is different, but we're talking about low level crimes. This is a
Yep.
low level misdemeanor at the bottom of the food chain. Pled not guilty because I knew the facts of the case, and then eventually I got acquitted in February 2020, or February 28th. And this is grounds for sealing a record now, because what people will do and what they will continue to do is, you're the butt bandit, you're the guy who mooned the police, all this stuff. Well,
Hmm.
prove it. Prove it. You can go out there on Facebook and say this, but ultimately, layman people don't come to these websites to prove the fact that you were innocent and you were acquitted. And that's what's so important to seal this stuff.
I see. I see.
So, all the dockets, all the stuff that's
Acquitted.
important.
What does that
Yep.
mean? What is acquitted?
Acquitted is basically saying the verdict of your peers have ruled in the sense of guilty or not guilty. In my case, I was not guilty, and I'm acquitted, meaning I am released of all forms of crime, malfeasance, misconduct, or willful disregard of a crime. It basically says what the city or the state comes to charge you against is that there's no merits to that crime, and therefore he never committed a crime.
Because the
So,
jury said, hey, no,
yep,
not guilty. The
not
opposite
guilty.
would be called a conviction, yeah?
Yes, conviction with guilty basically says your jury appears basically say, yeah, you did commit a crime based on the statutes, number one, and number two, based on the evidence that was provided. And we all know there's cases that are where you are not guilty and you're convicted guilty, and that's why there's appeals process. And kind of allude to that. That's why you always plead not guilty or not take a plea deal. You take in a plea deal, you almost relinquish your appeal rights too. So, and you will
Yep.
actually prevent yourself from a better case.
Yep. Yep. Got it.
So this is
Got
a
it.
good example. This is a good case to say, hey, it meets the criteria. We'll go over it here real quick.
Hmm.
It shows that it was acquitted and I pled not guilty. These are foundational arguments for sealing a record now.
Cool.
Okay.
Hmm.
Here's your rules. Kind of touch base into your rules a little bit.
Rules of what?
Everything,
What do you mean rules?
rules of the court, rules of the subject matter of North Dakota law. For instance, the sealing of a record is still considered criminal procedure,
Okay.
because it falls under sealing of records here, but it's also, lawsuits and everything else falls under civil procedure. And there's rules that govern how you apply law or how you file forms or stuff like that. Everything that
So
has to do what lawyers do.
every state has these rules, from court to rules of civil procedure. You see here on the screen, juvenile procedure, rules of evidence, rules of court themselves, rules of criminal procedure, and then appellate procedure. So you have all the rules there on the left here in North Dakota. And then, two, I wanted to show as well, Chris, point out the Code of Judicial Conduct. Tell us what that is, and the Code of Professional Conduct. What is that again?
Yeah, so everybody has rules and conduct that they need to follow by. And, there could be some interpretation of through each state. You have judicial conduct rules and you have lawyer discipline or professional conduct. So, interesting enough, we'll pull up the judicial conduct. Each judge has to be governed by certain rules of conduct, right?
Okay.
So, each judge needs to follow canons, and these principles go back to the days of the federal courts when we were establishing courts for, after the Revolutionary War. Is that this stuff is so important that these judges live by a certain code of conduct. Without listing the names of judges, I'm fighting a judge right now that has showed bias, prejudice, and harassment. What are the
Huh.
rules that are governed by that? Here I'll just highlight a little bit. These are the impartialness and stuff that we're arguing. This external influences, and kind of throw off subject. Political influence is governed under 2.4. Now, if I
Ah.
dig into that, I click the canon number 2. Here's all the behavioral stuff that needs to be followed by. So let's
So
go
judges
to,
have a behavior that they need to uphold in their position in court. They can't just do whatever they want.
Exactly. And I think that's what's going on in our country now, kind of to stir off a subject. Trump is fighting judges that are stepping outside the rules of the canons. And you hear it every day in the news. And these are good examples. Each court is trying what they're calling rogue judges. And
Huh.
this is what's going on. They're not following the canons anymore, they're making
Wow.
up their own stuff.
I wonder, geez, that's probably no good. Is that would that be considered treason in some cases?
It's one of those topics is that you're treasonous to the people that you have elected you or put you in position, and then therefore you're trying to change the American law and statutes and standards. You
Wow.
can twist this either way or any direction. Is like North Dakota needs to follow the canons, and what's interesting, the canons are adopted at high levels. So if I go Rule 2.3, Rule 2.3 goes to the federal courts, the Eighth Circuit courts, the U.S. Supreme Court. These are standard behaviors throughout each judge.
Interesting. So also, Chris, then if let's back up one, let's go to Rule 2.9 or go scroll down, excuse me, 2.9. This would be uh I thought it was ex parte communications. If I'm going to be speaking with one side but not the other, that's called ex parte communication as a judge, right?
Yes, good example. I believe we both have it in some of our cases. Is when and I'll use the criminal case. I guess they had a 15-year-old that had his throat almost slit. Right. This is a current case. I can't remember. It's I think Heller or Keller case.
Oof.
Vogel law firm talked to the judge, and it was actually put in the dockets. Talked to the judge of that record without the other attorney present, without the other people present of the opposing parties, and they did it in a closed door. That's ex parte, and it's against the canons. It really is.
That's
It's
no
it's
good.
bad. Yeah.
That's no good. So in some cases, Chris, I know that we're running a little long here, but I do want to
No,
highlight
go
the
on.
idea that if we're going to be a judge and we're going to not obey the canons, and those canons are derived from the United States Constitution, maybe we could even say that we're waging war on the Constitution with our behavior at that point.
Yeah, because you're basically, like, it goes back to the term rogue judges. They're basically making up their own rules to apply to their own district. And, I always want to say you can say it's political influence, it's money issue, it's vote issue, it's a job. I did some research today. These judges are making 250,000, always down to 120,000. It's a, imagine if you kick the judge out of his spot, you just lost 200,000 plus job.
Yep,
Obviously, there's money influence to a job,
you
and that's
bet.
all they know. So
Interesting, interesting. So, all the military people out here who took a oath to the Constitution, what would you do
yes.
if there's somebody waging war against it? What is your obligation? Anyhow, so we've got. Let's go. Let's continue, Chris.
Yeah. Going into kind of moving forward with the sealing of records kind of gives you I would say, know your battlefield. And a lot of the stuff we talked about is knowing your battlefield and the people that you deal with. Now, if you file your own motion as pro se in order to get your court record and they come back and oppose it, you have to start knowing the behaviors of the certain situations or the laws. You got to start arguing it. Maybe it's an influential judge that doesn't want to seal your record because they think you're a criminal, but you're not. But here's the cool thing: the North Dakota Century Code, the Constitution of North Dakota governs this. You can challenge a judge based on that whole principle, and it goes back to the remote public access to defendants' records. How do you seal it? And these are those rules that govern it. They cannot avoid those governing documents. And here it is, right here. A defendant in a criminal case can use these forms, right? But you have to be either dismissed or acquitted, and then you can seal this off from the record. We're
Okay,
not talking about sealing it from the judicial record. We're talking the public view because they construe the information.
gotcha, gotcha. So, where did we find this page? Where did this come from?
Yeah, this comes from the North Dakota courts.gov or ndcourts.gov.
Okay,
It's under your legal self-help, and it goes under public prohibit of access of criminals, right?
awesome.
So you kind of see it right up here in this website without digging through 4 different
Yeah,
clicks.
you bet, you bet. But so
Yeah.
you're saying that there is a whole legal self-help center for people who are interested in taking on their own representation or presentation of themselves in court?
Yes, and most definitely. Do not need a lawyer. I always say that if you feel like your case has been dismissed and acquitted and you have the record to show it, file these documents.
Cool. Awesome. And
And,
it's
and
here
it,
and it's free and here's how to find it. Cool, Chris. So
yep.
tell
And
us
right
more.
here,
What's all this right here now?
it even says it. Self-help represented individual may only represent themselves with when using these forms. So their rules and their laws in North Dakota says you need to use these forms specifically. Lawyers can use different forms because they're lawyers,
Mhm.
right? But if you were to follow a standard, because they want everyone on the same plate, they don't want to have one version of a document different times, right? Five
Sure.
different versions of it.
Sure.
But here's your self-help forms. Each one has a link, and I'll just give you a click on one of them. It opens up your PDF of the instructions. Let that give it a minute. And then it starts going into the rules of civil procedure right here. It even starts talking about the rules of the court, the rules of evidence. You need to be familiar with these sections, and it kind of guides you. This is like a 13-page guidance on what you do. And I'll just scroll real quick. As you
Sure.
notice, it talks about information, how to request it, what it means. This is what's given to you as the public. And we're talking 10, 15 years ago, they probably didn't even have this.
So
So
we've
that
got a
gives you an
nice
idea.
step-by-step guide right here as far as
Yes.
how to actually do it. Chris, can you scroll up again? I want to just
Yeah.
comment really quick because or down a little. You mentioned that they have to use these forms, right? And now that's
Yes.
expressly written here in bold print on this website. But I do want to mention I used the forms as a template and I crafted my own. And at this
Yeah.
time, I wanted to show how we can actually, Chris, I'm now showing, you probably can't see, but I am showing on YouTube. You can actually go to YouTube and check out Lightbringer, right? How to draft a court document, how to format and draft a court document. You can see here, and I show in 30 minutes how to do it yourself from completely scratch, right? And so you can use what Chris is talking about and what I'm talking about in that video, and you can become self-competent. And all I'm saying is, yes, they have it in bold, and we should give much respect. But that wasn't in the Century Code, and that wasn't a rule somewhere. It's just something they put on the website, right? And so we got to know what rules are actually rules for us to abide by, and what are their preferences. And I think that's a good distinction. Maybe we can get into that in another video, but we want to give as much respect as we can, but we don't have to. If we're going to represent ourselves as pro se, we have to understand that we're also self-governing, and so we don't need to be obeying absolutely everything. That's the whole idea of pro se, yeah, Chris?
Yes, exactly. What you're trying to do is get the point across. And I always say it's all about getting the information accessibly out there. For instance, you seal into the records.
Yep.
Use these forms, and that's why I put it up here. Here, the forms don't expunge or seal the records. What seals and expunges the record is the court order. You're just presenting it like a motion. You're asking for the courts to do this, and it deals with, filing a brief. Why is it so important that you file the brief? Because it's going to show, like I said, public humiliation, damages, show that it has a detrimentally impact. And these are why these forms are so standard, is that you need to present the argument the same way on every case.
Scroll up a little bit again. I want to show
Sure.
them all of those forms. Okay, so they're all incredibly important. Now, when we go into the rules of court, you'll actually see that to file a motion, we have to file a notice of motion, and we have to then file the motion, and then the brief is the legal argument behind the motion, and the declaration is a sworn affidavit of our own standing in support of that brief. Meaning, the brief is the legal argument, and the declaration is us saying, hey, yeah, no, I swear under penalty of perjury, this is what happened, right? And then we got the proposed findings of fact. This is you saying to the judge, hey, here's what I think you should sign off on regarding the
Yep.
facts. And then you're
Yes.
also giving a proposed conclusion of law, or a proposed order, they call it, and you're saying, hey, I've already written up an order for you, just sign right here, judge, and it'll be easy for you.
Yep.
And then the confidential information, and the declaration of service is a person just saying, hey, I swear under penalty of perjury that I sent this via whatever, electronic filing, or certified mail, or hand delivery, right? We're just certifying, saying, hey, I swear I delivered service.
Exactly. Yeah. And what's good is that I'm showing the actually all the forms you would submit. These are the forms on here on the right hand side that you would have to fill out and send in the court record. You can either mail it, upload it, and I'll show you the upload site. I think that's something we didn't cross over yet, is
Yep.
where you do it. You don't have to mail it. I think that's what's so great about this district court. You, as a pro se or anybody, can access the court filing of that court record, and
From
that's
my
important.
couch? You're kidding me.
Yes, from your couch. And I think that's what's so great is I don't need to spend $20 to mail this out.
That's great. Yeah, and
And
then
it's
the
free.
time to get
It's
to the post office, right? I got to take off work just to go to the post office. You kidding me? No.
Yeah, exactly. So of course and I'll jump into Odyssey here real quick since we
Sure.
talked about Odyssey is their online filing system. So
Okay.
what I'm going to do is just kind of go. Hopefully I can spell right. Odyssey, North Dakota, right?
Yep. Yep.
So which is great because Odyssey is where. Oops, there we go. Wrong one. Odyssey is actually courts on Odyssey, right? Odyssey is North Dakota's infrastructure for online court records. You can actually look at certain, courts. You can pull up the courts in a different way, not the way we showed earlier. This is actually internal filings of the courts, right?
Awesome.
So this is where you have the courts that every court in North Dakota is on Odyssey. So if you're in any of these counties and you have a dismissed record in that county, you file it within that county on Odyssey, and I think that's important.
Thank you.
Um,
Wow, that's really important. Okay, cool.
yep.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and see. I'm going to pull up Odyssey itself. Hopefully, this is the right link because I have a different link.
Now,
And
I'm certain that we could also find in the Century Code or revised statutes or statutes of our state, we're going to find how doing an e-filing is proper service. In
yes,
actually in North Dakota, I believe it's in the North Dakota rules of court that we actually find
yes.
this.
Yeah, remember rules 4 and 5 are essential. Is how to process serve people. In this case, a motion, and here's a good example of one of the cases I was helping with. Is that the attorney of record was actually in a different county out of Williams County Court. It was actually in the county north of them. So, without saying names, but overall, they have to take that filing and mail it to the attorney of record on your case. So, if you got to always service properly. So they mail it there, and that attorney up there does not have e-file capability. So that's why you would have to mail it and follow those rules. That's why it's so important to learn process serving rules and
Yeah.
how to do all that.
We're going to do
But
a video on process serving
yep.
exclusively because it is so important, and so many people, I myself had a case dismissed because I didn't serve properly, because serving people at the state is different than serving, like if I had a problem with Chris and I wanted to serve him, it's different for me to serve Chris than it is to serve somebody working for the government, especially somebody working for the state. So anyhow, we'll do a video on serving. That's a
Yep.
good idea.
Yeah, and it's a constitutionally protected rule too, and I think that's essential that people know that you have rules that protect your constitutionality on serving people, and that's governed in the court rules as well as the Constitution that's built on it. So another subject, but I think it's important to understand that because every time you service is actually the way you start cases.
And that's
Um,
found, just if they want to know right now, that's found in the North Dakota Rules of Court, Rules 4
yes,
and 5.
yes,
Yep,
civil procedures. Yep, civil procedures 4 and 5. Criminal proceedings are different. I think I haven't gotten versed on it because criminal courts are different.
yep.
They're actually more technical, and that's the interesting thing. Criminal cases are more technical and more refined, and has a stricter guidance.
It's
Civil
derived
procedures.
from the civil procedure, though, largely.
Yes, it's derived from it, and because there's different ways of serving, and we'll talk about that later too.
Yep, yep.
But ideally, kind of show you what the portal does, the e-filing, which is, if I'm 500 miles away, and I think there's remote areas of where I can't drive 5 hours to the court to file a document, or
Mhm.
my post office takes 2 weeks to file a mail-in. That's why they have e-filing. E-filing is exactly same day. You go ahead, do the courts, do ndcourts.gov, district courts e-filing portal, right? There's always a link to something.
Cool.
They use Tyler Tech technology. Let's go into this here real quick
Sure.
and kind of show you an idea. You walk into this site, you definitely have to register. There's a process of registering pro se. We won't go into it. I mean,
Yep,
that could be another video,
sure.
but ideally, I'll sign into mine here real quick. I think that's a good example to kind of see when you're available
Okay,
to do it on your own. And I'll just do this here real quick. Hopefully, I
okay.
remember my password.
There's an L on Gmail. Don't hit enter yet.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Fast typer.
There you go,
All
man.
right. All right, so I'm not going to save it over here, but here it is. Here's the
Yep,
dashboard,
yep.
and we're going to use my current case. I've already did some bookmarks and stuff, and I want to go to my bookmarks. There's a process to all this, but I won't go into it.
Yep.
Here's all the cases that I'm actively a part of. And here's a good example.
He's a
This
busy
case
guy.
is not. Yeah, that's what you got to do when they do wrong, right? This case is not public because the judge already automatically ruled this private and confidential, and this person filed a false case, and that's something we'll talk about later, is how to handle false cases. But the case that we're talking about is the criminal case, is right here at the bottom. If I want to file inside this, let's say you got all those forms done and you got to upload it all. So you're going to go into your actions menu, you're going to file into the case.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a handout that they give on how to do this, but it gives you an idea. This is the system that they do. They put all the litigation names of the people who are involved, and
Yep.
this is how they notify them. This is the
Yes.
digital notification. You don't have to mail it. You don't have to serve it.
You don't even have to email it.
File serving. Yeah. And for instance, we talked about a notice, right? Everything starts with the notice. Notice of filing, right? Notice. Then you go of filing. And then whatever that document was, you upload it right here, and boom, it's done.
Perfect. And you can even enter comments into the court, and in North Dakota, I believe all of this is free after the initial filing fee and the initial answer fee. The rest, totally comped.
But the cool thing, sealing of the records is free. You don't need to pay.
Nice.
Yep. So we're going to get out of that.
Okay.
I think that was essential to kind of show that there's an online system for people.
That's great. Thank you.
And if you have research, they have legal research and self-help. They have this accessible. But you got to remember that Google and all the AI and the chat GPTs and all this other stuff are essential tools. They're not governing authority. There's no rules saying you can't use AI. Some states are trying to make rules against it, but that's part of legal research. And how that incorporates, because AI is kind of like that super engine of research. It's a super Google, right?
Yeah.
And they kind of use sites like, let's say, justia.com, right?
Yep.
Justia.com is a great website now for, I don't even think I did it right. Justia. There it is. Yeah, it did go. Just a little hiccup. But Justia is these public records of case laws and searches across the world are actually the United States. Of what topic matter, like if I need to do a search of or let's say sealing of court records, this is good example, sealing of court records. Give me a city or state.
Yeah, Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Let's go Minnesota. Let's see if I can spell today, right?
There you go.
Nope.
Minus that right? There you go. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Search, and hopefully it comes up. Sometimes, hey, there it goes. Then you start digging into these cases and going, oh, these are case law. These are cases. Here's an order granting joint motion regarding of continued sealing of the record. This isn't research. These are legal researches and case law research, and that's important. Awesome. And I know another one that's been out there is called Case Text. And I'll give you the guys of the bad news. Casetext.com. And this is where you tell you corporate involvement, right? It's gone. This used to be a great free website, right? Where it's just like justia.com, but now they integrated this into AI modules. And of course, Thomas Rudders, who runs Westlaw, Westex, I think is what they call it. This is the system that the judicial courts use. They use this whole entire system for legal research. And there's kind of gives you an idea. Like there it is, Westlaw.
Yeah.
So Westlaw, yeah. Westlaw
they bought it?
Westlaw bought Case Text. So
no
Case Text
way.
Yeah, it's gone. It was a great free resource. I had probably hundreds of links on Case Text because it was very detailed.
Yes.
And you're limited to Chat GPT or Clio. You need to start. They're going to start. I'd say this, making it a corporate structure where you have to pay for free information.
That's nuts. Okay, well maybe we should,
another day
create some petitions for certain legislations of our, that's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah. That goes directly against Marbury versus Madison, it seems, So anyway, let's continue.
But just kind of give you, each state does have their legal research division, and that's incorporated by judicial law. in United States law is that they need to be able to find legal research across the board, especially the appellate courts, because appellate courts are the governing authority of final decisions. And that's, for an example, here's your opinions, your rules, your juvenile stuff, etc. And even the
Awesome.
North Dakota Constitution's even in here. And here's the Century Code. If I pull up the Century Code here real quick, if you ever have to search the Century Code, whatever it may be, how about this? Grass codes or whatever, it's all in here.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
all
Okay.
right here.
So like my HOA, all those things, how that,
Yes.
yeah. Oh, look at aeronautics, agriculture. I know the criminal code is in here. I believe that is, yep, 12.1 right there. Yeah, that's you got everything under the sun. The code is the Constitution codified, and then also the things that they've layered in as well. Is that a good
Yes.
way to say that?
Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to say it, because everybody you vote for that does law and what they make for legislation is literally written in here.
Cool. Cool.
I even heard there was like this old court rule that you can beat your wife on the court step. It's out there. I don't think it's in North Dakota. I can't remember what state, but they repealed it because that's an old law, maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago. But nowadays, yeah, you're dealing with some stuff.
You
And
got
I
to
think
be
that's
inside
what's
the courthouse for that kind of behavior.
Yeah, that's just, you're
Just
gonna get locked up nowadays, guys. That's the most important part.
yeah.
Um,
I'm
but
just kidding,
yeah,
everybody. All right.
you don't beat your wife on the court step. No,
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 no, no.
that's not right. It's then you're talking a human right division issue here.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
That's right.
yeah, we're gonna start going into that issue. And I think that's where labor comes in. We deal with labor arguments and stuff too. So,
Okay,
but
awesome. Awesome.
yeah, this is the brief of everything you need to do in order to learn these kind of things. Is that, without going into detail how to do it,
Sure.
this is the information that you need to do in order to file a sealed acquitted record, a judicial dismissal, that will be used against you in a public scrutiny. And I think that's the sad part. When you get publicly scrutinized and you are not guilty and you're not a criminal, you're almost still getting punished from your own peers, and that's what's so sad right now.
That is a huge, huge problem. Can you show us? Did you X out of that just now? Okay, that's
Yeah,
fine. I
yeah.
was just gonna say, so we saw that the code of judicial conduct governs the judge's behavior. The code of professional conduct, I just wanted to let everybody know, is that what governs the lawyer's behavior or prosecutor's
Oh yeah.
behavior.
Let
Okay,
I'll give you that site, the North Dakota Bar Association, right?
okay,
State Bar Association of North Dakota. This is the governing authority of bars. We won't go into the politics behind it,
okay.
but it goes into everything about who the presidents were, who the committees, who the directors, for the lawyers, how for the public. Here, check this out. They give you how to file a complaint,
Oh, look
how
at
to
that.
find a lawyer. Yeah,
Hmm,
so here's that legal self-help center,
awesome.
investigators, public services. You know, they have that part, and they also have the Judicial Conduct Committee. So, Judicial Conduct Committee of North Dakota. They have their own website that has those resources. Give you right there. Nope, that was the canons. Here we go. The Judicial Conduct Commission. This is the commission who oversees the judges.
Cool.
And give you an idea who the members are. Currently, these are the members who are overseeing the judges.
Awesome. Awesome. So this is we're kind of giving a high level overview again of how to assert yourself, and we're giving just kind of the on-ramp by showing, maybe the first step is to learn how to seal your court records, because they give you all of the templates. It's free. You can file it from your home, and it's a good way to get your feet wet with involving yourself and asserting yourself in
Yep.
court, uh, from the comfort of your own home. You know what I mean? What else might you add to this, Chris, as we wrap things up
You,
today?
when we start winning cases and you really see that this has impacted people, and I'm going to use your cases as an example, being prosecuted for 5 charges that meant nothing and that it damaged you. This is what it looks like in the future. I'm going to pull it up,
So
and I think
these
this is a
were,
good way to
you see that CR there. Highlight
yep.
that for them, Chris, in the case number. CR it's designating criminal for in North Dakota. Well, anyhow, they brought 5 criminal court cases against me, and they didn't have legal basis. Ultimately,
Yep.
13 months later, they finally dismissed them. And then Chris showed me how to, get these removed by sealing them. And look at what you see. It doesn't give a citation. It doesn't tell you anything about me. The defendant info tells nothing about. Look at and then highlight over here where it says internet access is prohibited under North Dakota Supreme Court Rule 41, which we talked about. And so the
Yeah.
judge granted that order, and it's gone.
Yeah, it's gone. It's on the record in the background. It's kind of like that hidden system, like LexisNexis or whatever they use on Westlaw or whatever, right?
Yeah,
But the thing is that no public entity, employers, people, Facebookers, newsmongers can't use this against you anymore. It allows for you to live your life of liberty and justice and free of persecution, especially when you were not guilty.
awesome. So that's super huge for everybody. What a win for America and for freedom. And Chris, thank you so much. I would
You're
love
welcome.
to have another session with you. I think our viewers would love to have a session with you too. And thank you for having me on ND Insider as well. I'd love to continue this and continue this education. What do you say?
Yeah, I'm all for it. I think this is just the scratching ground, and there's a lot more for North Dakota to actually change.
Cool. Cool. Let's make it happen. And thanks again, Chris.
All right, take care.
You too.
Bye.